What's up, Access Church? Welcome back to my garage. We're about to start our next Bible study. So if you want to grab your Bible, pen, something to write with, or something to write on, we'll jump into it in just a minute. Okay, so the past few weeks, we went through Psalm 121. We kind of took out everything that we could that was practical, and then plugged it into a bunch of other parts of the Bible, and I thought it was really fun. And so I want to try to do a similar thing, but with the entire Old Testament. I know that sounds really ambitious, but it won't be as bad as it sounds. It's really interesting. The Bible is not an exhaustive book, and it's not topical, so it doesn't explain every little thing, and you can't just flip to one part and then know all the things about some theological view. Otherwise, we could just go to the book called What God Looks Like, and then we'd read it and we'd know exactly what he looked like. But it's not like it doesn't work like that. God instead arranged this by having a ton of different authors from all over the place over a few thousand years. And what's really cool is there's all these many themes that are strung throughout the whole thing. So you have these different people from different times and different areas, and they kind of echo these same themes throughout all of the books. And so I want to spend some time looking at a few of those themes. So the first one, we're going to start right at the beginning of the Bible. If you want to turn to Genesis chapter 3, I'm going to kind of paraphrase through the story up until that point, and then we're going to read a verse and go from there. So Genesis chapter 1, it starts out with God creating everything. He creates the world, everything in space that the world needs to work however it does, gravity, stuff like that. He makes plants and animals, and he makes humans. And a really beautiful part of the story right out of the gate is that he makes this place called the Garden of Eden where the humans live. And what's really cool about it is that they're in perfect relationship with their surroundings, their environment, perfect relationship with each other, and perfect relationship with God. And so right here you get just a complete picture of what it is that God created us for. So if you're in the middle of an existential crisis and you want to know why you were created or why you exist, it's those three things: to be in good relationship with the things around you, your environment, and to be in good relationship with people and good relationship with God. So that's why we exist. Anyways, moving forward. Okay, so everything's great. Adam and Eve, every day they're having parties in the garden. They're walking with God. They're naming animals. And then they find out they have an enemy. And the enemy comes as a serpent and deceives Adam and Eve and convinces them that there's more than what God has already given them. There's something better, or in some way, with this extra bit of knowledge, they can become like God and then not need him anymore. They can make their own decisions and do what they want. And so they break the only commandment that God had given them. And it kind of shatters everything. It shatters humanity's relationship with their environment, humanity's relationship within itself, between people, and it shatters our relationship with God, because now for the first time ever, part of the story talks about Adam and Eve hiding from God because they were ashamed of what they had done. They were afraid of him, and God didn't create us to be ashamed or afraid of him or to hide from him. And so really early on in the story where there's this really high point that's really great, and then it just crashes into devastation. And if you want to go to verse 15 in chapter 3, this verse it's really interesting. If you can look at the rest of the Old Testament through the lens of this verse, it'll change the way that you read the Old Testament. So the rest of the story hinges on what we're going to read. So this is God talking to the serpent right after the serpent has deceived Adam and Eve. God says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." So God's response to Adam and Eve being deceived and then damaging the creative order of things. Because he tells the serpent, okay, man, you messed up real bad. And because of that, for the rest of your existence, you're going to have to contend with Adam and Eve and all of their offspring, which is humanity. So basically, we're going to be at war. All of humanity is at war with the enemy, with the serpent. And then he tells them something really interesting. And this is the hinge that the Old Testament hangs on. He says, her offspring, someone from her lineage, someone down the line, is going to crush your head. It's going to crush the head of our enemy and destroy the deceiver, and that person will signify the coming of a new way of life that perfectly mimics what happened in the Garden of Eden in the very beginning, when we had good relationships with our environment, with each other, and with God. And so this verse is like the moment in a movie where you're faced with a huge problem, and then you realize you need somebody, some kind of superhero to come and fix the problem, and you don't know who that is. And so if we can just pretend like we've never read the Bible, if we can pretend like it's our first time reading through the story, it'll read way different than if we read it as just some ancient religious holy text, right? So from a brand new perspective, what we've learned so far is God made things, we messed it up, we were deceived. God told the deceiver that somebody from Eve's lineage is going to crush his head, destroy the enemy. So now, every new person that comes on the scene, every story that starts about somebody in the Old Testament, we should be asking, all right, is this the guy? Is this the one, the offspring from Adam and Eve, that's going to crush the head of our enemy, defeat the deceiver, and restore, creation to the way that it was intended to be? And so we have Cain and Abel. And right away, we realize, no, we have two brothers that one of them goes into a jealous, angry rage and murders his brother, and so we cross them off of our list. And then you keep going down the line, and you have Noah, and at first it looks like Noah's going to do it because he makes the ark, and he saves some righteous people, and he saves all the animals, but then not long after that, he's growing grapes and making his own wine in the backyard and getting drunk and falling asleep naked, and weird stuff happens. So we cross him off the list. And then you just keep going down. King David, he was a really promising one, right? If it was the first time reading the story for us, we would have thought, for sure, this is the guy. This is the one that's going to crush the head of the enemy and usher in the new way of life that looks like how God created it in the beginning. No, we find out pretty quickly that David is definitely not the one. And the whole entire Old Testament is like that. So what happens is every time something new comes on the scene, we're reading it. We should be reading it as if, hey, maybe this is the one that's going to undo all the damage that happened, way back with Adam and Eve. And it's really interesting too. David's such a key figure in this story because when he was the king, it's the high point of the history of Israel. Things were good. They were defeating armies, things were awesome, and then not too long after he wasn't king anymore, the whole nation divided, and there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, and people were fighting, and bad stuff was happening, and they were having wicked queens. And so this is why, moving forward in the story, when we start reading about Jesus, people at the time thought Jesus was going to be a king like David, that he was going to crush the head of the enemy by being a political ruler, or for us it would be a president, that he was going to show up, and just like when David was king and things were really good for the first time ever, and then they declined, that Jesus was going to show up and take over, and he was going to be the real king, and like a political king, and rule the world that way. And Jesus didn't do that at all. And in Jesus' story, we get excited, or at least we should if we're reading it, as if we're waiting for the hero to show up. Because, man, he's raising the dead, and he's healing the sick, and the lame are walking, and the blind are seeing, and the deaf are hearing, and it's miracles everywhere. And we think, for sure, this is the one. And then he dies. And then people were angry. There were some political people and political religious leaders that were threatened by him. And so what they did is they got him and did this weird mock trial, and then they murdered him. They killed him on a cross. And so now, I mean, man, if Jesus wasn't the one, now in the story, we're getting worried. And this is why, this is why Easter is such a big deal for our church, and should be for everybody, because just a few days after he dies, Jesus comes back. He raises from the dead. And I'm sure most of us have heard the story, right? We've heard that Jesus comes back from the dead. But this was a significant thing, and more so than just what we think about, because there was thousands of years of history leading up to who's the one that's going to come and crush the head of our enemy. And all the way up into Jesus dying, we can't see it. And we keep looking for the hero, and it's not until he raises from the dead. And we realize, and the first-time readers realize, that, okay, Jesus didn't come back as a political ruler. He came back to save us in a different way. He saves us from our sin and the things that we did and the things that we do to perpetuate the damage that Adam and Eve did. That's what Jesus saves us from and saves us out of. And so that theme in the Old Testament is that from the point that God addressed the serpent and said Eve's offspring is going to crush your head, every new person in the Bible that pops up is pointing to Jesus. You read through Numbers, just name after name after name. This guy had this guy, and then this guy had another kid, and then this guy's sister had some kids, and somehow they matter. The reason that matters is because every time you read one of those names, as a first-time reader, you should have thought, maybe this is the guy. Maybe this is the hero that's coming. And so the whole Old Testament is this enormous build-up to when Jesus shows up. And it's, in my life, there's been a parallel to that. Only I haven't looked for signs of Jesus in things. I've looked for what I thought would be, my fix. In the same way that Jesus fulfills us and satisfies us, we look for that same feeling. We look for fulfillment and satisfaction and other things a lot. And so we need to be really serious with ourselves about where we're getting our fulfillment. I remember the first time, and I was just a kid, the first time that I got high, and I thought, if I can just do this every day, life will be great for me. This is all I need. And then it doesn't take long to realize, no, that's not true at all. This is not the hero that I thought I needed. This isn't the thing that I thought that would fix my life. People do that with relationships. You see that, oh man, young, puppy love teenagers make me want to throw up. And they even, I've got nieces and nephews and stuff, and I remember conversations with them where they're like, yeah, I'm into this new guy, and we've been talking, and man, he's the one, and if I could just be with him forever, everything in life will be great. And then I throw up on their shoes because it's disgusting. No, it's not true. That relationship is not the thing that's going to be your hero. It's not the thing that's going to fix, the damaged parts of your life. It's the only thing that can do that. The only person that can do that is Jesus. And we just briefly went over 3,000 years of history where the story is just over and over. Who's the hero? What's the next thing? Let's try it out and see if it's going to make everything better. But none of it will. Just like none of the people in the Old Testament could have ever done anything like Jesus did, because they weren't it. They weren't him. They weren't the one that God was talking about when he told the serpent, someone's going to crush your head. It's Jesus. Jesus crushes the head of the serpent. He's the one that fulfills us and satisfies us and repairs the damages that we do to ourselves. So, from now on, when you're reading through the Old Testament, one theme to be mindful of is that the whole thing is pointing to Jesus. Every story has significance to Jesus showing up. Every person has significance to Jesus showing up. And so as people who believe in Jesus and follow Jesus, this should excite us. Just like when you watch And my kids watch cartoons all the time, so anytime there's like the hero in the cartoon's about to beat up the bad guy the final time, we're already excited because we've seen it. We know what's happening. So the Old Testament should elicit those sort of feelings in us. We should be stoked. To get, all right, hey, King David, he didn't make it. That's all right because Jesus is coming. So yeah, there we go. There's our little thing. Themes in the Old Testament. So this week, be thinking about two things. Number one is, where are you looking for your fulfillment and satisfaction, and can you be honest with yourself and just admit that stuff is never going to do it for you? Like, Jesus is the only thing that will fix what you need fixed in your life. And the second thing is, man, try to get into the Old Testament and read some longer stories if you can have a long enough attention span to get through it, or listen to it on an audio app or something. But if you listen to, the longer the story is that you read, the more you'll be able to pull out of it, the more you'll see themes connected and things like that. Anyways, have a good week. I'll see you guys in a few days.